afternoon, Year 11. You can say it's not primary school, I know. Good afternoon. And can I say good afternoon to the rest of the school who I think should be tuned in and I'll be watching us. So, okay, we're here this afternoon because we've got a special guest with us. And before I introduce Colin, just want to set the context for what's happening this afternoon. 20 years ago, before you were born, there was a terrible terrorist incident in Warrington, and 2 young boys were killed. And this year is the 20th anniversary of that terrible event, and to commemorate that event, there are different things going on around the town at the moment. And what we're doing this afternoon is we're going to hear about what one person did, and it was the father of Tim, who was one of the boys that was killed. What he did following that dreadful tragedy. Because we're a Christian school, we teach about forgiveness and reconciliation, but sometimes that's easier to say than to do. But what Colin and his wife Wendy did was to set up the Peace Centre, which many of you know about already, and the Foundation for Peace, as a way of trying to make some good come out of something terrible. And he's coming here this afternoon to meet you, to speak to you for a while, to explain some things, and then to engage in a dialogue with you and to try to explore some of the issues that you might have in your mind, some of the questions you might have in your mind about exactly what's gone on there. So, without further ado, let's give a big warm welcome to Colin Parry.
Thank you for the warm welcome. I'll speak for maybe 5, at most 10 minutes, giving you a potted history, and then I'll take questions. But as you've been told, my son, who was 12, happened to have the misfortune of being in Bridge Street, 1993, March 20th, when 2 IRA men had planted 2 bombs, one halfway down Bridge Street and one at the top end of Bridge Street. And the one halfway down detonated at about noon, and it blew in a betting shop window, as I remember. Did no damage to any person, but did a little bit of damage to a building. But people, although I wasn't there, people recognised it was a bomb, or had been a bomb, and they made their way quickly up Bridge Street towards the green, what do you call them, those things at the top of Bridge Street, which weren't there then, of course. And unwittingly, they walked into the second bomb. And that was classic IRA tactics at the time, to have 2 bombs and often catch people out unawares. So Tim was standing outside a shop, I don't know if it's still there, it used to be called Scott Sports. Is that still there? Yeah. Is it? Very near what used to be the old Boots shop, which is now, I think, empty. And Tim was with a friend, Pierce, and another boy, and the 3 of them had gone out. I'll tell you a little bit of strange, it's funny how the fickle finger of fate works. About 6 weeks before the bombing, Tim had a very, very serious appendix operation. He'd been moaning for days, saying he wasn't feeling very well. I just thought he wanted to bunk off school. But the day that we rushed him into hospital, he could have died, actually. His appendix had probably nearly burst. We rushed him into Warrington Hospital, recognised the problem, whipped his appendix out, and of course, that was successful. And the doctors said to his mother, Wendy, when they were releasing him, no sport for 6 weeks at least, he's got to heal. Well, Tim was a bit of a charmer, and he could work his mother around his little finger. And after about 2 weeks of the 6, he said to his mother he could play in goal for the school football team. And she said, no sport. He said, no, goal, no problem. I'm only walking from one post to the other. What's that, about 10 foot? It's not strenuous. I'll pick the ball out of the net a few times, and that's it. So his mother said, under pressure, okay, you can play in goal. He saved a penalty at the end of the match. I think it ended up as a 2-2 draw, but the score is incidental. Having saved the penalty, his decision that he always wanted to be a striker, playing for his beloved football team. Let's get football allegiance out the way now. The whole family is Everton mad. Okay, never mind. And Tim wanted to be Everton's next goalkeeper instead of being a centre forward. So the reason he was in Warrington that morning was to buy a pair of Neville Southall. Now, nobody will remember Neville Southall, off in your head. Who was the then Everton goalkeeper, the Welsh goalkeeper, Neville Southall football shirts. So he set off for town with £11, thinking that would buy the shorts. In fact, even in those days, it wouldn't have bought the shorts. They were £19, so he never could have bought them anyway. He was standing by the bin which had the second bomb in it when it detonated, and it blew up. And the bin, the outer casing of the bin was plastic, the inner casing was metal. And of course the impact of just 8 ounces of Semtex, which was the explosive that IRA always used, in a confined space, blew the bin apart, and the inner casing, the metal bit, shattered into small pieces and became shrapnel and flew off in all directions. And a young boy called Jonathan Ball was killed. He was 3. He died within an hour. He was out with his cousin looking for a Mother's Day card, and Tim was very seriously injured. He didn't die that day, and 56 other people were injured to varying degrees. Obviously pandemonium, terror, fear, people running around like you would expect you and I would as well if you knew a bomb had just gone off and you see people lying injured. And we went to the hospital having been able to account for Tim's older brother Dominic. We knew where he was. Tim's younger sister Abigail, we knew where she was, but we couldn't account for Tim, so we were quite worried. And in the end we went to the hospital. And there were lots and lots of people, members of the public, pushing and jockeying to get to the front to speak to hospital staff, to see if they could identify friends and family. We got to the front in the end, and I gave a description of Tim, who'd actually grown quite tall in the few months after he'd gone to Great Sankey High School. So he looked, although he was 12, he looked more like he was 15. And we said our son was 12, gave a broad description, and they said there's nobody at that age that's seriously injured in the hospital. So we thought, fine, he's somewhere else, he's not here. But 3 hours later, a Catholic priest, who for some reason had started chatting to my wife and I, asked us would we go into a private room. At that moment, we were obviously concerned. Just the simple act of being asked to go into a private room. And in a few moments after we got in the room, a surgeon came in, still dressed in those cover gowns, you know, the green things they wear on their shoes and so on. And he brought in an envelope from which spilled a watch and a St. Christopher chain. And he said, "Do you recognise these?" And we said, "Yes, they were Tim's." And that was when we realised he'd been very seriously hurt. And he'd been operated on for about 3 hours by then. And he took the blast to his face. All the injuries were his head and face. So that was the start of the journey. And Tim survived for 5 days. He was transferred to Walton Hospital in Liverpool on the 2nd day because they had a brain unit where Warrington Hospital didn't. But 3 days after that, he died. And so Tim and Jonathan were the 2 casualties, 2 fatalities from the bombing. Now you might imagine you do all sorts of things in those circumstances, and we certainly had no idea how life could ever be the same. The thing which kind of changed and gave us a sense of direction was when the BBC came to our house and invited us to make a documentary TV programme for a series called Panorama, which is still on television to this day. It's the BBC's flagship documentary series. And they said, would you go to Ireland and meet people living in Belfast and other parts of Northern Ireland, and also go to Dublin and go to the United States, go to Boston in the United States, because Boston, per head of the population, is the most densely populated Irish-American city. And we said yes, we would go and make the programme. It took a month to make one TV programme. And in that month, 2.5 weeks of that month was in Belfast and Northern Ireland, which is where all the problems were. Several days in Dublin and then several days in Boston. The armed struggle of the IRA and the armed armed struggle of the loyalist groups. Now again, I'm making some assumptions here, you know what I'm talking about. The loyalists were just like the IRA, they would kill people as well, but they were fighting for Northern Ireland to remain in the United Kingdom. The IRA wanted the Brits out. The IRA wanted to be in a united Ireland. You know there's a border that splits Ireland, don't you? Yeah. So the loyalists were every bit as evil in their acts as the IRA were. But we spoke to many families who lived with this, with the fear that men carrying guns were always just around the corner. And the British Army was on the streets in armed Land Rovers. British armed foot patrols, heavily armed soldiers were walking the streets of Belfast. It's something you would find hard to imagine now, because these are things from a grim past. That's how Belfast was. Dublin was much more peaceful, because obviously there was no conflict in Dublin. But the most depressing part of this one-month programme was the 4 days in Boston in the United States. And I'll tell you why. And the reason is that the Americans in Boston were the most incredibly ignorant people. Now, when I say ignorant, I don't mean bad-mannered and rude. I mean ignorant, they didn't know anything. They were all deeply Irish in their roots and immensely proud of being Irish and would swear allegiance to the old country, even though they'd never been born there. It might have been 4 generations earlier than that. And they had a silly notion that the British Army used to walk up and down the streets of Belfast and say, Catholic, bang, you're dead. Catholic, shoot. It was just so bizarre. The way they thought life was in Northern Ireland was so wide of the mark. It was just incredible. And we came away from the making of this programme feeling quite depressed that we didn't see how there could ever be peace in Northern Ireland. And yet, strangely enough, 1 year later, 1994, the IRA declared its first ceasefire. And they declared the ceasefire at midnight on August the 31st, 1994. The first minute, therefore, of the ceasefire, first minute, was on September the 1st. Guess what's Tim's birthday? September the 1st. It was very, very poignant to us that the ceasefire should begin on his birthday. I don't suppose the IRA knew that. But again, it's one of these strange acts of fate. And the beginnings of the peace process started then. And the ceasefire broke down, and another one came along in '96. And they bombed the centre of Manchester in 1996. And they bombed Canary Wharf in London. So there were still acts of violence going on, and violence in Northern Ireland. But bit by bit by bit, there was a worldly realisation that there could never be a peace settlement whilst there was shooting and killing and bombing. And so, of course, in 1998, the Good Friday Agreement, which you may have heard of, was signed. And since '98, nominally, there's been no more violence. Of course, there are occasional sporadic outbursts of violence, generally from dissident breakaway Republican groups who don't approve of there being a peace process. But by and large, it's considerably more peaceful than it was. In 1998, I gave up my full-time job in order to find the time to try to raise the money to build the Peace Centre. Have many of you been in the Peace Centre? Yeah? Do you know where it is, even if you've never been there? Well, that building cost £3 million. And I raised the bulk of that money, but not by being somebody who could make money that easily. I mean, if I could, I'd have been a millionaire years ago. But by speaking to the people who had connections to help me. And the most significant person in the raising of that money was a politician who sadly is no longer with us, a lady called Mo Moen, who again you very probably haven't heard of. But she was a most remarkable female British politician. She swore like a trooper. She was effing and blinding most of the time when you were with her. And that was one of her ways of testing you. She used to call you some terrible names. Didn't mean she didn't like you, it just meant you didn't know which Mo you were going to get. The nice one who put a round around you, or the one who told you to go away. But Mo got us a meeting with the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair. And through Tony Blair, we got to meet senior Americans in the Bill Clinton administration, because Clinton was the US president at the time. And through those connections, we got a donation of £1 million from one wealthy Irish American. And that £1 million donation enabled us to contemplate having a building the size of the Peace Centre, as it is now, rather more than some small and very low-level building. And the building, I think you'd agree, is a fascinating building. Even if you don't think it's the most beautiful piece of architecture, it is a very, very good building. And of course, the work we do now is mostly in the Peace Centre. And We work mostly with young people, and mostly with young people who are either getting involved in violent extremism or who are at risk of becoming victims themselves through violent extremism. So that's one group we work with, and the other group we work with is adult victims of terrorist attacks. So other people who have suffered through terrorism. Now that might be civilians like my wife and I, or it might be former soldiers, it might be emergency workers, it might be former police officers, and so on. And we work with people who are affected by 9/11 in New York when the Twin Towers were attacked. We work with people from 7/7 when Al-Qaeda supporters bombed the tube trains. And so our reach is now very, very far and very wide. And we work with people from all around the world, here in Warrington. I think that's probably enough by way of an introduction. So it's not the Warrington Peace Centre. Don't ever let me hear you call it the Warrington Peace Centre. It's the Peace Centre, which happens to be in Warrington. That Peace Centre is unique. There is no other peace centre like that in the UK. I don't think there's one in Europe. I'd venture to suggest there isn't one in the world. It's a brilliant and dedicated, exclusive peace centre. That's all we do. And on Wednesday this week, we had a very interesting speaker who came at my invitation. You may or may not have heard about this, but it was heavily covered on the news. Martin McGuinness, who was a terrorist. He was an IRA terrorist. He's killed people himself. But he's now a serious politician in the Northern Ireland government. And he came at my invitation and addressed the Warrington audience in the Peace Centre on Wednesday. I've had a few nasty tweets about that, and you shouldn't be talking to scum like that, with other words wrapped around it. But as I was just saying to your head, I mean, there's no point in me saying this is a peace foundation and this is a peace centre if we are selective about who we talk to, and if we only allow certain people in and not other people. You understand that? This is an important point of principle. We talk to anybody if it will help with peace building and reconciliation. That's probably at least 10 minutes, and I'm starting to get a bit hoarse, so I'll stop at that point. But that's a quick overview of the history from the bombing through to today. Thank you for listening to that.
Thank you very much, Colin. So let's start some questions. Now, I know some of you have got some questions prepared. Colin may already have answered those questions. So think about what you want to ask. So who is going to start off for questions? Sam.
I went to the lecture on Wednesday night and found it really interesting and intense at times. Why did you decide to invite a former member of the IRA to Warrington?
So you were there yourself?
Yeah.
Were you? Oh, well done.
With Mr. Police there.
Right. Well, I was interviewing in about April time for a BBC radio documentary. 5 Live is a station you may know, news and sports station. And they asked me to do a 1-hour documentary. And I interviewed Martin McGuinness as part of that programme. And at the end of the interview with him, as I was just about to leave and thank him for giving me his time, I remembered it was the 20th anniversary year this year of the bombing. I remembered we hadn't got a speaker for this year's peace lecture. And we don't have one every year, but most years we try to. And on an impulse, I just said to him, I'd like you to deliver this year's peace lecture at the Peace Centre in Warrington. And whereas I thought he might say, let me think about it, I'll come back to you, he just immediately said yes. So the deal was done in an instant, in the blink of an eye. Then afterwards we have to sort out date and time and the type of event it would be. But he agreed immediately after I asked him, almost without realising I was going to ask him. So that's how he ended up there.
Thank you. So who's going to ask the next one? Clarice?
Why did you decide to visit North and Southern Ireland as a result of the war?
Well, back in
Yeah.
at the time. Well, I probably have preempted some of the questions slightly, but it was at the invitation of the BBC to make this programme. I don't think we'd have gone if we hadn't been given the opportunity to make the programme. I can't imagine we'd have just jumped on a plane and gone over to Belfast and strolled around the streets. It wouldn't have worked. But because we were going with the backing of the major broadcaster in this country, the BBC, obviously they sent researchers ahead to find people who we would meet. Catholic families, Protestant families, politicians, people who were on the fringes of the violence. So they set it up for us to meet them in order to make the programme. The one thing they didn't do, because I wouldn't have agreed to do it, they didn't script the questions. They didn't give me a sheet of paper and say, these are the questions you want to ask. The questions that were asked were the questions I wanted or my wife wanted to ask. That's how we ended up there.
Can I just ask you a question on that. Did that help you and your family in that process after you went over?
Well, it did, because the seed of the idea of a charity and of a peace centre came from that programme. I mean, the only part of that month which was universally depressing and demoralising, the only part of it that was slightly hopeful was a visit to a peace farm in Colin, which is a small town very near the northern coast of Northern Ireland. And there was a group called the Peace People, who were people who had decided they would campaign against the armed struggle, they'd campaign against the violence. And they had a farm where at weekends young Northern Irish people, Catholic, Protestant, male, female, any mixture you could think of, would go on weekend conferences. And they would have very, very heated discussions about the future of Northern Ireland. They would also tend hens and sheep and lambs and things that they had in the fields and grow crops. So it was a kind of it wasn't just talk, there was also some work to be done. But it was an interesting atmosphere. And we sat in on one of the debates, which never made it into the final programme, rather sadly. But the debate was fearsome, absolutely fearsome. So although they were all wedded to the idea of non-violent solutions to the problem, it did not mean they were all terribly courteous and sweet-natured. They had some really vicious arguments, but no violence. And of course, words never killed anybody. And I vividly remember there was a young lad in there who had a very severe disability. I think he had spina bifida, but a very bright lad. And his sister had been shot dead by one of the loyalist groups when she worked in a roadside burger bar with a friend. And a loyalist hit squad had driven past on one Saturday morning and strafed the place with automatic gunfire and killed both girls, both the schoolgirls. And he came under tremendous pressure from his family to join the IRA to take revenge on loyalists who'd done it. And because he belonged to the peace movement before the death of his sister and her friend, he had the strength of character to say no. Obviously he was mortified by what had happened to his family, but he resisted the pressure from older voices in his family to join the armed struggle. And that was very impressive to listen to this young man. He was only 17, telling us that story. And I remember he went on to study at Liverpool John Moores. I'm not sure what he did, but I've lost contact now, but he was a most impressive young man. And that place gave us the idea, we didn't realise it there and then, but sometime later, that we could create something similar in Warrington, where we could bring young people together, where they could talk and explore their differences without any resort to violence. So that was the real payoff of that programme for us.
Thank you. So who's next? Who wants to ask the question? Lucy, put your hand up.
What do you think about the recent conspiracy theories about Lawrence and John?
Ah, yes. Well, did you see the programme? Did you? Well, it took me by surprise. I'd never heard of this Red Action Group, and I actually asked Martin McGuinness about it, and he scoffed at the idea. He gave it no credibility. Now, the problem I've got with Martin is he says he knows nothing about the Warrington bombing. Do I believe him? No. But he says he doesn't know why Warrington was bombed. He doesn't know who did it. He knows it was the IRA, an active service unit of the IRA based in the northwest of England, but he says he doesn't know who authorised it. But he does say it was the IRA, and it wasn't some left-wing, socialist-leaning group populated by English people. And that was what the programme was suggesting. There were Englishmen who did the Warrington bombing, and they were like a franchise operation doing it on behalf of the IRA. He scoffed at that. He said it would just be inconceivable that would have been the case. So he says it was definitely the IRA.
He reaffirmed that the other night, didn't he, at the lecture, where he said, he thought it was the IRA. Nathaniel?
What plans do you have for the charity in the future?
Survival. That sounds a bit grim, doesn't it? But the main thing we have to work on is survival. I mean, we have a wild stab in the dark how much money our foundation, needs to raise every year just to survive. Just have a wild guess, any of you.
Million.
No, it's not that much. It's always good to aim high, isn't it? And you put the question on the spot. No, it's not £1 million, although I'd like £1 million a year. But we have to raise £600,000 a year just to stand still. And for a small charity in a medium-sized town like this, that's a big, big sum of money to raise. It's all very well the national charities, you know, our colleagues, the NSPCC and Guide Dogs for the Blind and Lifeboats Associations, they've got deep, deep, deep reserves of money. We have no reserves at all. If we don't raise money sufficient to meet our needs in 4 months' time, we're dead, we're gone. That's how close to the wind we are. And that's why we always have to constantly try and find new support and get financial backing. Because it's all very well people saying, we like what you do, we're with you, but unless people stump up a few bob now and again, we're dead. And it would be tragic, on top of a tragedy, if that charity died before I died. So my main ambition, to answer your question, is that the charity's still here when I go and when my wife goes. Because it was, what a waste that would be to have set it up and it's doing brilliant work. And because of lack of money, we couldn't keep running it. The problem is once you start employing people, you pay them a salary. And when you're in a grand building like the Peace Centre, it costs money to heat it and light it and maintain it when things get broken. And that's a lot of money even before you start doing the work you set it up to do. So I'll have a chunk of your pocket money later.
Who's got any more questions?
Do you know why we targeted Warrington?
No. Well, I can keep it the short answer or make it slightly longer. No, I don't. I mean, 2.5 weeks before, they attempted to blow up a gas plant. You may know this, again, you may not, but your mum and dad would remember, on Winnick Road, you know the road leading up to the M62, where the health centre is on the left, what we call Total Fitness or whatever. Anyway, there was a gas storage plant there where they had gas cylinders, yes, so long and so wide, sitting in a big stack, commercial gas. And about 2.5 weeks before the Bridge Street bombing, they attempted to blow that place up. And had they been successful, they'd have devastated a large area. They would have killed goodness knows how many people, because it was residential housing across the street. All they succeeded in doing was in detonating one of these cylinders, and it created a big fireball in the sky, which was captured on camera by a resident filming from his bedroom. What he was doing with his camera on 3 in the morning, I don't know, and I won't go down that route. But anyway, he filmed it, and the BBC and the ITV and everybody showed it on the main evening news because it was a big story in Warrington. I remember Tim sitting with me and being spellbound by this. It really was like from a distance, it looked like a nuclear explosion, a big ball of fire in the black night sky. The guys who did that were apprehended, fleeing Warrington, and were arrested, 3 of them. And the police officer took a bullet wound in his foot for his pains when he arrested them. Why they did that, I don't know. I think the Bridge Street bombing probably was in retaliation for that attempt failing and for the 3 guys doing it being caught and locked up. But why they came to Warrington in the first place, why Warrington, why not Wigan or St Helens or Liverpool or Manchester, I don't know. But they just happened to choose Warrington. Perhaps because the motorway network places Warrington at the kind of hub of the motorway. You've got M6, 62, 56. You can get in and out of Warrington, well, apart from daytime, you can get in and out of Warrington quite easily. Daytime you wouldn't. But they obviously came in at night and did their deed then.
Good question, Colin. Some, there is no direct answer. Is there? Still don't know, but that's the way to flee out of Warrington, the location. It's easy to get out of, in theory. Who else had a question?
Lots of our pupils go to the Peace Centre for courses and activities like the youth club. What's the vision for the Peace Centre when it's built?
2 things. To provide help for young people at risk of violence or getting involved in violence to turn away from violence, because in the end all it brings is pain and suffering. And there is no conflict anywhere that's ever solved by violence. You may, if I put a gun to your head now and said, you agree with me on everything I say, you're going to say yes, otherwise I might shoot you. I don't change your beliefs, I don't change your mind, all I do is make you so afraid you say you agree with me. To actually get a lasting understanding with people who are your enemies or the people who you fear, you have to have a debate, you have to discuss things, don't you? There's no other way. So we have young people come in, and we have adults who are, as I said a moment ago, who are victims of terrorist acts. Like I say, former civilian victims like us, military, police, and victims of 7/7 in London and so on. So we have 2 streams, youth work and support for victims.
describe that work with young people and with adults as well. What do you think has been the most successful piece of work that you've done, where you can actually see the impact of what you've been doing?
School in Leeds. 6 months after 7/7, I was invited to a conference in Leeds to speak to an invited audience. And it was in Leeds because the 4 guys who put bombs on their backs and blew up 3 tube trains on a bus all came from West Yorkshire. And Leeds is the main city in West Yorkshire. So the conference was in Leeds, and I was invited to speak to the audience about our work with in an Anglo-Irish context and the success of our work. When I'd finished my talk, I was cornered by 3 guys who were politicians, local councillors on Leeds City Council, who proceeded to tell me about this school called South Leeds High School, and the fact that it was a school in danger of meltdown. It was a not brand new, but about 5-year-old, multi-million-pound facility, fabulous school, created when they closed a predominantly white school and a predominantly Asian school and put them all into this new school. And from day one, there was considerable violence, black on white, white on Asian, black on Asian, and the right ethnic mix. It was a rich cocktail, and the police generally had 6 police officers in the school every day, and a SWAT helicopter had landed on the school grounds on one occasion because things were getting so out of hand. So the proposition was, could our charity, our foundation, go in there and make a difference to that school? And if I keep the story fairly short, the answer was yes. The school is now a fully functioning school, which gets good Ofsted reports and has not got the problem at all that it used to have. And we did that by doing a leadership development program with 3 groups of 24 kids at a time. And the 24 kids were identified by the school as being the kids who were the opinion formers, the ones who influenced other young people, and we put them into the workshops. So 72 had gone through it after 3 workshops, and then they cascaded the lessons they'd been taught by us down to the rest of the 1,500, 1,600 kids in their own way, using their own language, not our language. That school turned around, and the head teacher credits us with the change, the governing body does, Leeds City Council does. Just as an aside, the head teacher was a big Everton fan, which made it a project I really wanted to take on. Okay?
That sounds amazing, because actually it's just made me think it's such a shame that Northern Ireland doesn't have a facility like this, because all the schools in Northern Ireland we'll be doing in our studies, most of them, if you're a Catholic, you go to a Catholic school, if you're a Protestant, you go to a Protestant school. You're not privileged like, it doesn't matter what religion or faith or creed or race you are in this country. And that...
Well, of course, they do have integrated schools, but not that
very
many.
few,
Not
just
that
in
many.
excess of 30, and the tensions that Colin referred to earlier in Coleraine, I know about those. I went to school in Coleraine, and that school, the work you just described there in Leeds would have been amazing.
Well, of course, the proposition up until very recently has been that they would have a peace centre in Northern Ireland, and it would be built on the site of the Maze prison. Again, you may never have heard of the Maze prison, but it's a celebrated prison where most of the IRA and loyalist prisoners who were convicted of serious crimes were in prison. It was a prison where they went through a whole host of terrible things. Hunger strikes, 9 IRA men starved themselves to death rather than collaborate with the prison regime. One of them was a man called Bobby Sands, who is part of the folklore of Northern Ireland. Bobby Sands, whilst he was laying near dead, was elected MP for West Belfast. If you go into Belfast, you'll see a mural on the side of a wall which is just Bobby Sands, 30 feet high. He's part of the folklore of Northern Ireland. He died by starving himself. There was a dirty protest. I won't go into details, but you can work that out for yourself. A dirty protest where they used to smear the walls with stuff, and they would wear blankets. And the outrageous behaviour was just off the scale. But that was at this prison called the Maze Prison. The proposition from the Northern Ireland government was we will now convert that into a peace centre. In fact, we offered to help. We've said if you want any help and advice from us, we will help you. But just recently there's been a split between the predominantly Unionist Party and Sinn Féin, which is the Republican Party, about the principle of it being on that site. A lot of Unionists are now saying you're going to make it to a shrine where terrorists lived and died, and we don't want it to be a shrine. Sinn Féin don't see it that way. The main Unionist Party does. So it may now not never happen. But you're right. I think Northern Ireland would benefit from having a facility like we've got here.
And hopefully integrated education potential.
Yeah.
So, just bringing back just one question to finish this with. No one from the IRA has ever been convicted of the Warrington bomb. If you, Colin, had to give a message to those terrorists that committed that act of atrocity that day, what would you say?
Well, the only thing I could say is, do you ever reflect on the results of what you did? I mean, I can't believe if the man or the men are alive still, that they don't know the names and faces of Tim and Jonathan. The names and faces have been in the public eye for 20 years, so I cannot believe if they're still alive, they don't know who they killed. How they live with that, I don't know. But I would want them to come and talk to me and to listen to the truth about how a family was devastated by the 12-year-old boy. And I couldn't speak for the Ball family, sadly, because Jonathan's parents are now both dead. But I'm quite sure the devastation was equally as great for them. But the simple devastation of a child's death. I mean, if a child dies in a road traffic accident, it's tragic. If a child dies through ill health, it's tragic. These things sadly happen. Nobody expects a child to be killed in a north-west of England town called Warrington. A child to die because of a terrorist bomb, do they? Incomprehensible. It would never occur to you, but you know, that's the fate we suffered. Because Tim happened to be, he saved the penalty, he wanted the shorts, he went out, he stood in the wrong place, his friend Pierce was behind him, Pierce was deaf for a few hours. Tim was actually a human shield for his friend. His friend wasn't physically injured at all. Shrapnel passed him, hit Tim. Pierce lost his hearing for a few hours because of the blast. He's got his hearing back. Pierce has since served 2 tours in the British Army in Afghanistan. He's a father of his own 2 kids now. He's a great guy. Good Everton fan, so. But that's by the by. You know, this is not a campaign to get to become Everton fan, but he, you know, how life turns on fine margins. If Pierce had been in front of Tim would have lived. But that wasn't the way it was. And you never know what's around the corner with life, do you? That's the point. The simple point is you do not know when your number is up. Tim didn't go out that day, never imagining he would never come home again. I never thought I'd be carrying his coffin. I never thought I'd be lowering him to the ground, lying on a bed with him when he died. All of that I've gone through. And the pain is unimaginable. None of you are parents yet. You will be one day. And you can imagine. You expect to bury your parents, not bury your children. So it's a hard, hard, hard life lesson.
And hopefully whoever it is committed that realises the shame that they've made there. And can only finish with just saying thank goodness that Colin and his wife created this foundation for peace, not just for Warrington, for this country, and in a lot of the work that they're doing abroad too. Can we show our appreciation to Colin for coming today?
Colin, thanks very much for coming and being with us today, sharing what must be a really difficult story, and we really appreciate that. We also appreciate the work that you've done for Warrington and for the peace process and the influence that that's had in lots and lots of different ways. We haven't got £600,000, I'm afraid, but what we have got, you'll notice this scruffy bunch in front of you here, and normally absolutely fabulously attired in perfect school uniform. Well, you're not scruffy, you're not scruffy. But we're not in uniform today because we wanted to raise some money for you. So what I'd like to do is present you with a cheque.
Thank you.
Which will go a small way to helping all the good work that you're doing.
All contributions helps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Let's
you.
give Colin a round.